how can we break down the barriers to truth so that we are equipped to make good decisions as citizens? Welcome to Future Hindsight, where we take big ideas in civic life and democracy and turn them into action items for you and me. Because democracy is not a spectator sport, and tomorrow starts right now. I'm Mila Atmos. Disinformation and misinformation get all the attention as the villains in our information ecosphere, but they're really just one part of a much bigger problem. We are in the midst of an infodemic that is eating away at the foundations of our body politic. Discerning truth isn't only a personal challenge, because when citizens stop seeking truth, democracy crumbles. Our guest is Pauline Hoffman. Also known as the Data Doyenne, Dr. Hoffman is an esteemed infodemiologist and the author of Fake News, Witch Hunts, and Conspiracy Theories, an Infodemiologist's Guide to the Truth. And before we start, thanks to Shopify for supporting Future Hindsight. Shopify is a platform designed for anyone to sell anywhere, giving entrepreneurs like myself the resources once reserved for big business. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/hopeful, all lowercase. And if you want to support Future Hindsight, subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's easy and free and a great way to build your civic action toolkit every week. Head to youtube.com/Future Hindsight to subscribe after this episode. Welcome, Pauline. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Mila, for having me.
So you are an infodemiologist, and I have to confess that I didn't know what that is, and I'm going to guess that most of the audience doesn't either. So to start off our conversation, it would be super helpful to have a common understanding of the terms. What is an infodemic, and how do disinformation and misinformation fit in?
The infodemic is the pandemic of disinformation, essentially. And I should define disinformation and misinformation or distinguish the difference. So it could be essentially the same piece of information, but it's the intent. So disinformation is someone is creating a piece of information for some gain. They're getting a political gain, they're getting a power gain, they're getting money, perhaps some economic gain. Misinformation is you might see that piece of information and think it's true, so you share it with your followers or you share it with somebody. You're not doing it for any kind of malicious reason. You're just doing it because you see this from a trusted source and you're sharing that. So the infodemic is essentially the study of all of that together. So who are those players creating the disinformation? And then who are those people who are then believing those folks and trusting them and sharing it? And so that's how disinformation, misinformation play into the infodemic. And I would like to think that I coined the term infodemiologist because I hadn't seen it before. And I thought once I started studying disinformation and the infodemic, I thought, well, I guess that makes me an infodemiologist. So I don't know that that's 100% true. We need to fact check that. That could be disinformation, but I'd like to think I coined the term.
Terrific. So early in your book, and it really caught my attention, you shared that you thought that people who believed misinformation and disinformation were just stupid. But then you say, and I'm going to quote you now, quote, "In believing that people were stupid, in a way, I fell victim to disinformation myself," end quote. Say a little bit more about that, because feeling or thinking that other people who don't share your own beliefs are stupid is pretty widespread.
It is widespread, and it's very hard to not think that. And I will own, even though I admit that I know that's not the correct way to look at life and look at other people, I still sometimes will be speaking with folks and think in my head, boy, maybe you are stupid. But the reality is, just because you don't know what I know doesn't make you dumb. I don't know what you know. That doesn't make me stupid either. I think we really need to understand why people are believing what they believe, what their frame of reference is, what their background is, to truly understand. Now, that doesn't mean we have to agree with them, but I think in order for us to really understand the other side and to be able to communicate, what the truth is, you have to understand where people are coming from. And I have a great story that I like to share. So my brother and I are very, very diametrically opposed politically and scientifically and so on. But he's brilliant. He's fantastic at building houses. I'm not building a house. So if you judged me based on my ability to do that, you would think I was stupid. He's not writing a book. So I often go back to a quote that's commonly attributed to Einstein that I tried to fact check, and I still haven't found out if this is completely true or not. But essentially, it's everybody is a genius. But if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will think it's stupid. So you have to kind of understand where folks are coming from. And I live in a very rural part of New York State. So I live in the red part of New York State, and I work in the healthcare space. And I will talk to folks and try to understand perhaps why they might be anti-vaccine, for example, or why they're reluctant to trust certain groups. And I think that's where, we have a bit of a disconnect because, there are some of us, perhaps myself included at some times, I want to say, but you're wrong. This is not correct. But then I have to understand why they believe what they do, why they might mistrust folks like me or people in the medical establishment, for example. So I think it's important to really understand why people believe, where they're coming from, and how you can then communicate best with them. Like, what is it that you're going to say, or who is it that you're going to reach out to, perhaps, to best share that information with them?
Yeah, it's really important, definitely, to understand who you're speaking with and meeting them where they are so that you can convey hopefully accurate information. But let's talk about getting accurate information first. There are basically building blocks for disinformation. There's a formula, so to speak. Talk us through it so that we can ourselves recognize it and dispel it when we see it, and so we can figure out for ourselves what is true.
That's becoming so much more difficult, particularly with artificial intelligence. Generally, what I say is make sure you know what it is you know. Truly be confident in your own knowledge, but then also, I would say be more confident in what you don't know. I know what my expertise is, but I also know that I don't have expertise in some particular areas. I find that there are some folks who don't necessarily know that so well, but generally what I say is, okay, take a look at the piece you're seeing. Where are you seeing it? I'll joke with folks. If someone says, well, I saw this on Facebook, immediately I'm suspect. Okay, well, where? Who posted it? Was it your neighbor? Was it some person who has no knowledge of anything? Was it the guy in a basement who has his own blog? Or was it a scientist? Perhaps an attorney, if it's that expertise you're looking for, or an accountant. Who is it that's generating this information? And it's so easy to then take a look to find out, is that person legitimate? Is that author legitimate? I even often just start by Googling something. So if I see something that looks suspect to me, I may just punch it into Google just to see, okay, well, what's being said about this? Who's saying something? And then dig deeper from there. Take a look at when something was published. Is there a motivation behind what people are saying or what they're sharing? Are they trying to do it for some economic gain or some political gain? Are they trying to work on your fears? Because people don't like to be in a state of fear. And I see that a lot now with some of the politics too, and with some of the health and science information. They're trying to really prey on people's fears, especially if people don't have that background knowledge to recognize whether something is true or not. So again, I work primarily in the healthcare and the science space. So when I see people sharing information about any healthcare topic, and they're really trying to instill that fear, like if you give your kids these vaccines, it's going to cause autism, or it's going to cause mental health issue, whatever the narrative is. Well, no one wants that. So you're preying on someone's fear. People also are trying to find other people who believe as they do. So, you're trying to find that group or your tribe, if you will. So you're going to believe something that already supports your own beliefs, but also that maybe is something that's part of that groupthink. But yeah, usually I say, take a look around. Does it seem suspect? And sadly, I'm almost looking at everything now that I see as suspect. And so I've become that person. All of my friends will reach out because they don't want to do the fact checking and they make me do it, which I'm fine with. I'm that nerd. But take a look at where it is. I mean, honestly, if I see something on Facebook, immediately I'm thinking something's not right. And I shouldn't just pick on Facebook. It's other outlets as well. But generally speaking, if it's not coming from some reliable source, but then that definition is really suspect too, because my reliable sources are different from some other people's or what they consider to be reliable sources. So you get very much a politics involved here, or the left-right, or the urban-rural. I mean, so you have a lot of different dynamics at play.
Yeah, I was a history major, and so I always tell people, if you see anything, try and find the primary source and then see, like you said, when was it published? Where was it published? And is there maybe another motive that is not disclosed in the article, but might be disclosed in the primary source as to why something was conducted, like a piece of research? One of the things that you mentioned in your book is that the Dairy Association sponsored a piece of research about the benefits of dairy or the impact of dairy. I don't know whether it's now the benefits, so I don't want to misquote you. But it's the kind of thing where some things are basically place advertisement, which is in this world very difficult necessarily to spot immediately.
Well, then you compound it too. When you take a look in the United States at our Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and then Dr. Oz, who both have money at stake with some supplement companies and others. And of course, they're going to want to perhaps put policies in place, which is incredibly dangerous. That level platform is what scares me, I think, the most, because you are in a position not just to promote these things, but to actually draft policy and have policies created. So that's a different level of power that scares me. But you're right. It is important to try to understand, okay, is there another motive? And that's why also when I hear some of the narratives as well, true or not, and most of them I don't find to be true. So here, disinformation again, when they're trying to discredit someone by saying, well, they're in the pockets of big pharma. So I think we saw that with some of the ACIP committee. The narrative was, well, they're getting paid by big pharma. No, they're not at all. But once you get that narrative out there and you say it over and over and over, people are going to believe it, especially if it's coming from someone they tend to trust or want to believe.
Well, you've just given us a good guide on how to discern the truth. And so much stuff, though, is happening right now, and it's really, really difficult to stay on top of everything. And of course, I know this is partly on purpose, right? To sow doubt everywhere about the truth. One of the most salacious things has to be conspiracy theories. Some are so outlandish, you know they're false, but some seem to make sense because they do contain a kernel of truth. And although sometimes I have a feeling nothing matters anymore, in a time when so many people really do believe very deeply in these conspiracy theories, I do think we should still be able to at least identify them for ourselves. How can you tell if what you're encountering is a conspiracy theory?
That is incredibly difficult, and I'd say you would use the same method. Take a look at where it's coming from, see if you can find other information that might corroborate it. Is it coming from a particular group? What I find troubling particularly now with conspiracy theories is I feel as though you have people who are living in a very different reality. Their definition of what is real is not the same as what we're looking at as real. So it's incredibly difficult to even communicate when their world that they've created or are living in is not the same. And I don't mean literally like they think the sky is green or what have you, but when you start thinking that there are really these secret groups of folks who are trying to undermine democracy or who are trying to control the weather so that hurricanes are hitting certain cities, which is, of course, not true, but they're trying to explain something that really doesn't have an easy explanation, and that seems logical to them. Of course it's not logical, but to some people that might seem completely accurate. So there's a great example, Tiffany Dover, and there's actually a podcast about this too. She was one of the first nurses to have received the COVID vaccine, and they were doing it on camera so folks could see that there was nothing going to happen. Sadly, she has a condition that if she gets really stressed out, she will pass out. So she's on camera getting the COVID vaccine. What happens? She gets the vaccine, she passes out. Sadly, she passed out off camera. So then when she came to and she explained what had happened, it was too late at that point. People thought she was replaced by Tiffany Dover drone, I guess. I'm not really sure. And so here she is trying to explain, no, it's legitimate. But then anytime she would do that, the conspiracy theorists had one more thing to put up there, right? So she apparently had a Facebook post and claimed it was her. It was her. But the conspiracy theorists said, but she looks like her hair color is different, or she looks a little heavier. And I'm like, right, she went to a stylist and maybe had pizza. I don't know. I mean, I'm giving you the proof. But I'm going to counter that with something else. So when you start believing conspiracy theories, it's almost as if your facts aren't facts anymore for people. But yeah, conspiracies are much more difficult because there are people who truly believe them. And to your point, many conspiracies do start with a kernel of truth that just then expanded. And I like to think about the belief in UFOs and creatures or aliens from other planets and things. That could have a kernel of truth, and then when the US government started to declassify some of those documents, at first I was like, oh, that's fantastic. And then I thought, oh, but no, because now people are going to think all these other conspiracies could have some truth too. That just leads to other conspiracies because some of them are dangerous. If you remember Pizzagate from about 2008, 2010, I think it was, the narrative was that the Democrats have a sex trafficking ring in the basement of this particular pizza joint in Washington, D.C. And then a gentleman who wanted to, initiate vigilante justice showed up at this pizza place with a weapon. There was no basement. There was no sex trafficking ring. And luckily, no one was hurt. But that's where it gets to become dangerous, right? When you start to have people who believe this and think that they have to take the law into their hands and they have to do something about this, that's troublesome. So I know I got a little bit off the subject of how do we get people off that cliff, so to speak, but that's where it's dangerous. That one I don't have 100% answer to. I think is you just have to chip away. But I think with some conspiracies, you might just have to let people believe them.
Yeah. Not all conspiracy theories are the same, and some are perfectly harmless to believe in, and some are not. So we are, of course, in a time when social media companies are incentivized to keep us on their platforms. And one way to do that is to offer us really enraging content. And then we are so enraged that we share that content to our entire network. How do you think about our individual responsibility when we encounter disinformation?
Care before you share. Don't just automatically share. I know, and I'm guilty too, of just participating in like a knee-jerk reaction, right? I see something salacious and I want to share it, but I really try not to do that. Please don't share something, especially if it's satire, I want to share with my friends because it's funny. But sometimes people will believe that too. So you have to be very careful with what you share. And you want to make sure that you're not contributing to the infodemic as much as is possible. Fact check if you can, or reach out to me. I'll help you fact check. I probably shouldn't say that right on the podcast because I'm going to have everybody reaching up, which is fine. I'd rather you did that than try to share something. But I think we're very guilty of that. And some of that comes from fear, comes from our passion, comes from our emotion. I remember when the war in Gaza first started, we had so much disinformation from both sides of that. And I had a colleague reach out wanting me to comment because she knows I write about disinformation. And I didn't want to right away because I wanted to make sure I had all of the information as accurately as possible before I said anything. Because in our current media culture, I think in addition to being salacious, it's also being first, right? So being first with the information is important because if people hear that, as I mentioned, they're going to then share that. And then they may not follow up to find out if what they actually shared was true or not. They're just going to keep sharing the first thing that they heard, especially if it's sexy or it's salacious or it's perhaps, poking fun at the other side or the group that we're against. So it's more important in my mind to be accurate. You want to be factual before first, but that's not the way our current media environment runs, unfortunately. It's more important to be first with the story because if you come after the fact, people probably aren't listening to you anymore. And that makes me very sad.
We'll be back with Pauline in just a moment, so stay with us. You'll want to hear this episode's Civic Spark, one small step we can all take to be more empowered and ignite collective change. But first, when I first started Future Hindsight, I had to figure it all out on my own, which is pretty tough when every day seems to introduce another question that needs an answer, and fast. That's an overwhelming feeling when your to-do list just grows and grows with new tasks every day. To tell you the truth, that list can pretty easily take over your life if you're not careful. So what if you could find the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything? Because that would be the game changer, wouldn't it? For millions of businesses out there, That tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the United States. From household names like Momofuku and Magic Spoon to fresh brands that are just getting started. So if you want to get started, take the first step with your own design studio. With hundreds of ready-to-use templates, Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand's style. Plus, Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography, so you can accelerate your content creation with no problem. With so many great tools at your fingertips, you can get the word out as if you have an entire marketing team behind you. In just a few quick minutes, you can easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. So if you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Let me tell you what I love about Shopify. No matter how big you want to grow, Shopify gives you everything you need to take control and take your business to the next level. Turn your big business idea into cha-ching with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period and start selling today at shopify.com/hopeful. Go to shopify.com/hopeful. Shopify.com/hopeful. We also want to share about a podcast that we think you'll enjoy.
Malcolm Gladwell here. This season on Revisionist History, we're going back to the spring of 1988 to a town in northwest Alabama where a man committed a crime that would spiral out of control.
There was this joke that said that it was easier to get forgiveness in the Church of Christ for murdering somebody than it was to be divorced.
From Revisionist History, this is The Alabama Murders. Listen to Revisionist History, The Alabama Murders, wherever you get your podcasts.
And now, let's return to my conversation with Pauline Hoffman. Yeah, you said something really interesting now, because we talked about how we can tell the truth, and you just said that a lot of the media is trying to be first as opposed to fact-checking first, which might make them last. So one issue, of course, is that people largely no longer trust the media. And by that, I mean large mainstream networks like CNN or CBS, etc. And they think that alternative media or independent media deliver the truth. And so that, of course, cannot be true, that this one other stream of media is only telling the truth. And for full disclosure, of course, Future Hindsight is a source of independent media. But I do think overall it's probably good that people are alert enough to look for various media sources. And on the other hand, what often happens is that people only seek out sources that they already agree with. And then you're in this cycle of confirmation bias. How do you think about trustworthy media outlets?
It's so interesting you asked that. I was just having this conversation with one of my colleagues who's a lifelong journalist, and he's now a journalism professor. And we were talking about the state of media now because so much of what is called mainstream media, and that can be your CBS, NBC, even Fox News and CNN, are so corporate now that you almost don't have that independent voice. And we were actually discussing, what does the media environment look like moving forward for journalists? Because anybody can be a journalist if you think about it, right? I mean, you and I could have a podcast, right? And we can call ourselves journalists, or we can say that we're getting at the truth, which we would be. But how do then people discern that? And I often ask my students too, who do you get your news from? Or where do you get your news? And it's not from any of the major networks, if you will. It's not from what we consider mainstream media. They're getting their news from particular folks that they've followed and that they look to be truthful. Now, some of them, thankfully, are actually journalists or are sports, media folks, but some of them aren't. Some of them I have to actually look up. I'm like, who the heck is that? And then I have to say, I'm not sure that I would be trusting that person with the news, because anyone can have a platform. That's where it becomes really dangerous. And you're right. People are going to seek out those voices that are in agreement with their own views. So you certainly do have the confirmation bias. And I'm guilty too. I mean, I try as much as I can to seek out news that isn't just what I believe, because I want to know what the other side is thinking, or I want to know why people might be following particular ideas or following certain people. And what I'm also bothered with is I feel like we also don't have the level of civility we used to have. I feel like everybody, in order to be heard, has to just shout at each other or yell at each other and insult each other, and which I won't be participating in, but that's almost become the norm too. So we've come away from unbiased news, or as unbiased as possible. You could argue you're not really going to ever be unbiased, but as unbiased as possible, to pretty much now just opinion editorial everywhere. So you have a media environment that isn't just delivering the news and then allowing you to formulate your own opinion. It's pretty much telling you what you should be thinking and believing and acting and doing and so on.
Right, right. It's definitely feeding the infodemic and is a big part of the toxic political discourse that we are swimming in right now. Having said that, it's really not going to fix it by itself. And politicians, of course, are also alongside the media busy feeding the infodemic. How can everyday people talk about disinformation or conspiracy theories? And I know you're not going to change the beliefs of hardcore believers here and make them change their minds, but there's still value in presenting the truth in our everyday interactions. And you were talking about your brother earlier. What's a good way to engage here in our everyday lives? Talking to our relatives and our colleagues who are, let's say, entrapped in the infodemic, and we want to have a conversation based in reality.
One of the questions I'm often asked is, how do I get through Thanksgiving dinner, for example, without having, a food fight? And I usually say, in any of your interactions, you have to have established a level of trust with the people you're dealing with, and you don't do that overnight. And once you don't have that, it's so incredibly difficult to get that back. But you need to establish that level of trust, and you do that by, I think, finding some of that common ground. Like you mentioned my brother again. So when we get together, we've agreed to a moratorium. We won't talk about politics. We won't talk about religion, but we do talk about some of those things that we have in common. He's my brother. I'm his sister. We love each other, for sure. We both have some common things we can talk about that have nothing to do with politics or religion. So can you get back to the basics? And here I refer to like Maslow's hierarchy. So we all, I think, can agree that we want people to be safe. We want people to have a home. Whatever that home may look like may differ. We want people to feel as though they belong to a group. We want people to have food and water. How we might get there might be different, but if you can at least go to the basics as much as possible. Now, at your holiday dinner, maybe it's remembering some of those times when you were kids or something, or play a game, do a puzzle. Are there things that you can do? Talk about the dinner, that have nothing to do with the politics, because that's generally what people are arguing about: politics, religion, money, maybe. And so I'm thinking, if you're talking with your colleagues, maybe you have that similar moratorium. But if these are people who are clients or people who are your customers, if you will. So I mentioned I worked in public health. So I'm often dealing with folks who aren't believing what's true, and I have to figure out how to communicate to them. I have to establish a level of trust. They need to know that I understand what they're saying. So you have to be able to listen to people too, to understand, again, where are they coming from? Where are they getting the information? Who is it they're listening to? Maybe I have to go talk to that person. But then also, who are those people in the community that maybe they're going to listen to? So who are those opinion leaders that you can also rely on to hopefully communicate some of that information? But I usually say, we're going to have to agree to disagree. We don't want to start a fight. Let's talk about something we can agree on. Is it so important that they believe what you believe, that they believe the truth? You don't have to convert everybody, if you will. And maybe this isn't the time to do that. It might take baby steps. So you really do need to think also about, do I truly have to respond to this? And try not to get angry yourself, I think, is some of the key. That is so much easier said than done. Please, I recognize that. But take a deep breath, maybe leave the room. But, I think those are some of the things that you could do. It's not going to be perfect. I actually had a class last year we were teaching, and I was giving some of these tips and tricks to my students. And one of them came back after the holidays and said, gosh, that worked. And I don't know if I was more shocked that it worked or if I had a student that listened to me.
Well,
Good news.
it's good news. It's clearly good advice. So we all like to think that we ourselves are immune from the infodemic and that only other people fall into the trap of believing things that are not true. And from this conversation, it's clear that that's not true. We are ourselves vulnerable. So what are the tools to inoculate ourselves against the infodemic?
I have an overarching societal tool that I think is important too. I think education is going to be the key to combating the infodemic. That's not something that happens overnight. Everybody always wants the quick fix. I'm actually not a fan of putting warnings on things on social media and so on, because I just worry that people are then questioning, well, who are the fact checkers? Those people are probably paid by Big Pharma, but, any number of answers. I think that the more educated we are, the better we're going to be. We have so many literacy problems here in the country. Like I say, we suffer from a lack of media literacy, health literacy, science literacy, political literacy, civic literacy, fill in the blank literacy. And the only way you're going to combat that is with education. But of course, what are we seeing in our country? They're taking away education. Some of the memes that I see, it's like, is education illegal in the United States? And that's not funny, but kind of. I don't know how to react to that. But the more we can teach young people particularly, and then continue that on, how do you identify this isn't as important as, can you even recognize something like that? Like, do you have the background in science or the background in the politics to see something and immediately think, I should look this up? I think that's where we're going to really solve this problem, honestly, is through the education. That's at the more societal level. Now, individually, just like I said, I think I just look at everything now and assume it's not true. And that's not the way to live necessarily. I mean, that's going to really make your life a mess. But I almost fact check everything. Unless, again, based on my own background, I know, okay, this is true or this is not true. So that's where it's so important to know what you know, but more importantly, to know what you don't know. Those are some of the keys, I think, here. It's not an easy process. And, as I mentioned, artificial intelligence is certainly making it much more difficult to recognize because it's getting really good. Some of these videos and the images I see, and it's so hard. I don't necessarily have the answer yet to how you can identify that as well as, some other pieces, but I'm looking into that. But the same thing, take a look. Where's it coming from? Who's created it? Does it seem to make some sense? Are reasonable outlets reporting this as well? So you have people out there who are fact checking, who are doing the due diligence, and, are they commenting on it? I think that's important to note.
Right, right. I attended a lecture by a CIA analyst a while back now, and people were talking about fake images, AI-generated images, and she said, anytime I see an image, I always ask myself, who does it serve for me to see this image right now in this time? And that's a really good frame to always be vigilant about everything that you see, whether that's an image or an article. And of course, like you said, education overall is going to be the societal fix. And of course, the federal government is busy trying to defund education. So every week on Future Hindsight, I ask my guest to share a civic spark, one small step we can all take to be more empowered and ignite collective change. What's a good way to turn the insights that you've just shared with us today into action?
I think one of the things I'm always telling folks is please at least maintain a degree of curiosity. Don't accept things as they are. Don't just assume that something you see or read or hear is true. Don't fall into some of the traps of, I really want that to be true, so I really hope it is. Or don't just fall into, gosh, that seems funny, let me share it. And then also really care before you share. Don't jump in and just be the first one. Don't share something just because you think it's funny. Others might think it's real. Really be mindful of your own actions. So maintain your curiosity, which means like lifelong learning. Don't stop learning. And learn from the right places, I guess, too. But it's also important to learn from, I guess, folks who are spreading disinformation and conspiracies to keep yourselves on your toes. So curiosity, care before you share, really don't participate in the spread of this if it's possible. Just try to think about whether or not you have to respond. You might not have to, get in the fray. So don't be the person who's sharing the disinformation. But again, maintain your curiosity. I think that's probably good advice just in general.
Yeah, good advice, definitely. Looking into the future, what makes you hopeful about solving the infodemic?
I'm hopeful that I think we have enough people who recognize that this exists and who are really trying to help, that I think it's going to turn some things around. I don't think that some of the changes that are happening are really going to stick. Yes, we're trying to dismantle education. I don't think that's going to stick. I think that people are going to start to recognize the dangers of that, and I think things are going to turn around. I also don't think that this movement that we're seeing is as powerful as it seems. I think social media and other outlets are able to amplify voices in a way that makes it seem as though you've got more folks involved or more people on a particular bandwagon than are truly there. I really think you've got more people who are sitting back, who maybe are just thinking about how to get into the fray or how do I get involved, who don't necessarily know how to. And so this is where I say curiosity matters. Your vote matters. I mean, especially in this country, please don't let that be taken away, right? I am hopeful that this is going to turn around. I do think, though, that artificial intelligence is going to make it more difficult, but I think that you have some folks working in this area that are going to, I think, perhaps put those tools together so you can recognize this, or I don't know. I have to be hopeful in that regard, right? I don't know that that'll happen, but I am hopeful, though. I mean, this is a sad statement for me to make, but I'd like to think that I won't be needed and that disinformation will go away, but I think I'm going to have a job for quite a while. So I'm hopeful about that. Is that the most twisted thing you've heard, Mila?
No, it's good. It's good to be hopeful about that. I do think you're right that there's a lot of amplification about ideas that maybe not that many people really believe in and are not really following, but are on the edges, undecided, and paying attention, though. I mean, I want to believe that people are paying attention. I don't think that people are willfully not paying attention. I think it's very difficult. I mean, so much is happening that anytime you open a newspaper or listen to the news on the radio or on TV, things are changing in dramatic ways, and that will hurt you.
And I think more than seeing it in the papers, because there are so many people who pay no attention to the news. I don't know how they couldn't, because that's sort of my lifeblood, right? But when they start seeing it hit their pocketbooks, I mean, now we're seeing with our government shutdown too, that some of these programs won't be available. Our health insurance premiums are going to be spiking. That's when people are going to start paying attention more, when they start realizing, oh, wait a minute, what's going on? So perhaps I shouldn't have believed X, Y, or Z, so I think we're going to see some of that too. When it really starts hitting people personally, sadly, that's when I think it's going to really matter.
Well, Pauline, thank you very much for joining me on Future Hindsight. It was really a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here.
Pauline Hoffman, also known as the Data Doyenne, is the author of Fake News, Witch Hunts, and Conspiracy Theories, an Infodemiologist's Guide to the Truth. Remember, civic action doesn't have to be complicated. It's about small steps that spark progress, like sharing this episode with a friend. Let's recap this week's Civic Spark and fire up our collective power. Maintain a degree of curiosity. You don't have to be cynical, but be questioning. Do your due diligence and make sure the information coming to you is accurate. Like Pauline said, care before you share. Next week on Future Hindsight, we're joined by Emma Brown. She's executive director of Giffords, where she oversees the organization's work to save lives from gun violence through shifting culture, changing policies, and challenging injustice.
We put out a scorecard every year in our organization. We give every state a grade, A to F, and it is now empirically shown every year that the states that have stronger gun laws have fewer people dying.
That's next time on Future Hindsight. Now, be sure to follow us on your podcast app so you will always hear our episodes. We're here to build your civic action toolkit every week, so follow Future Hindsight now and we'll come right to you. And if you're listening on your browser, head to futurehindsight.com and subscribe right on our website. Finally, if you want to support Future Hindsight and all the work we do as an independent pro-democracy podcast, follow us on Instagram at Future Hindsight Pod. It's easy and free and a great way to stay up to date on all things civic engagement. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, see clearly, act boldly, and spark the change you want to see. This episode was produced by Zack, Travis, and me.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.